Welcome to the Secure Start podcast, brought to you by the Secure Start Aura apps, supporting trauma-informed care and practice at home and in school.
Children of veterans, people don't even think of that as a category. Well, when you look at the domestic violence rates and the specific challenges and PTSD impact to parents and the amount of trauma that we receive, we actually are a specific category, just nobody talks about it. So much of the way that all of the systems are set up requires there to be a functional adult. For me, if no adult is describing the elephant in the room or asking direct questions of children because they're scared, they're sort of like, well, that's not my job, or I'm used to feeling expert at something and I'm uncertain, which is a really big part of it. We're humans. We don't want to make it worse. We don't want to get it wrong. But if no adult is doing that because of their own discomfort, then you're putting it all on the child to be, oh, excuse me, can I just describe the situation that is a complete secret that I never let anybody know about and I'm going to activate? It's way too much pressure to put on kids. If you've got a really highly traumatized family in lots of different ways, everyone is creeping around each other, trying not to make it worse. Making it more embedded into the places where children are definitely going to be, I think does address some of that. I think it is much easier when the trauma expresses itself as crying for people to access compassion. When your trauma expresses itself as anger, that is a lot more difficult for people to see as anything but an attack and something that needs to be stopped and reprimanded. And, you cannot change a system that is broken or where gaps exist based on everyone wants the model and the evidence. Well, I'm sorry, if you're addressing a gap that hasn't been addressed before, there is no model because it's a gap.
Welcome to the Secure Start podcast. I'm Colby Pearce, and joining me for this episode is a leading voice for the experience of children and young people who were not or are not placed by child protection authorities, notwithstanding their experience of trauma at home. Before I introduce my guest, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that I come to you from, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge the continuing connection the living Kaurna people feel to land, waters, culture, and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. My guest this episode is Ruth Clare. Ruth is an author, TEDx speaker, and intergenerational trauma educator whose work bridges research, nervous system science, and lived experience. Author of 3 books, Ruth's award-winning memoir, Enemy, tells the story of growing up as the daughter of a traumatised Vietnam veteran in a home marked by family violence and addiction. Her TEDx talk has over 600,000 views. Ruth's work is dedicated to preventing children growing up in families like hers from falling through the gaps. With a background in biochemistry and communications, Ruth translates complex trauma research into practical tools and psychoeducation for individuals, practitioners, and organisations. Ruth is the developer of Parenting After Trauma, a structured group program for trauma-affected parents in veteran and first responder families, built around her original 4R model: recognition, regulation, repair, and reframing. So welcome, Ruth, to the Secure Start podcast. It's really nice to have you here, and it's nice to have someone who's in a similar time zone as me as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me as a guest, Colby. I really appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about you, and the work that you do?
So I guess the work that I do related to being on this podcast and in this place right now began when I published a memoir with Penguin in 2016 called Enemy, which is about my experience growing up as the child of a traumatized Vietnam veteran and the impact my dad's trauma had on us as a family. And I didn't start out being an author. I'm a copywriter, so writing is my natural jam, but I just kept waiting for someone else to write a book about
Mm.
the experience that I was having. I found, I love reading memoir, and Angela's Ashes. You've got, the that was my sort of one of my gateway drugs. But I like
Mm.
reading books about people who've had similarly traumatic childhoods because it normalizes, it makes me feel less alone in that experience.
Yes.
And it began when I was pregnant with my first child. I started to really think, what happened to my dad that he could possibly have behaved the way he did as a parent? Something
Mm.
happened inside of him to have made that a possibility because it felt impossible for me to even wrap my head around that. And because we grew up without my dad ever talking about the Vietnam War, I didn't have that as a real context. He sort of said, I went
Mm.
to Vietnam. He had some army stuff around the house, but it was never spoken about. And I started to become really curious about how much of an impact did that have? Is what happened in my family, there was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of controlling behavior. My
Mm.
mother became an alcoholic. There was a lot of ramifications of my dad's trauma spilling out into us. And
Mm.
um, he so I started exploring um, the Vietnam War, and I started looking around for, well, surely there'll be books by other children of veterans. And what I found is that there is literally no books, no research, no study done on children of veterans, which felt kind of
Mm.
crazy to me. And I was really just looking to go, am I alone? Is this a pattern? And it was when I started to do the research that I sort of said that, well, there really isn't very much research on this at all.
Mm.
And so that was the beginning entry point to sort of trying to start a conversation that hadn't been had about the generational impacts of military experience.
Mm.
And since that time, Enemy got published. I did quite a bit of media around it at the time. I got in conversations with Richard Feidler, but I was trying to kind of start a conversation or get in there, get amongst it.
Mm.
How do we do something about this? How do we know more about this? And I found it really difficult to
Mm. Break
actually
in.
kind of break into systems and kind of go,
Mm.
why are you guys not more interested in this? Because I'm your target market. I'm literally what happened here. And yet no, it's like I do outreach. And then I started to just I've been through a lot of lulls. I'm a speaker as well. So I do
Mm.
quite a lot of keynote speaking and TEDx talks and whatever. But it still feels like what I'm wanting to do is actually help to change the situation.
Mm.
And to do that means to talk about it, understand it, look at it from different angles, look at where gaps exist, know more about it. And children of veterans being so unknown in the veteran landscape
Mm.
means that we are so erased as thinking of ourselves as a category of people
Yeah.
that even trying to go, children of veterans, people don't even think of that as a category. I've had people sort of go, that's
Mm.
not a category of people. I'm like, well, when you look at the domestic violence rates and the specific
Mm.
challenges and PTSD impacted parents and the amount of trauma that we receive, we actually are a specific category, just nobody
Mm.
talks about it.
Mm.
So a lot of my work has been about, I now sit on like a Monash University steering committee investigating domestic violence in veteran
Mm.
families. A recent finding found that 45% domestic violence rates
Mhm.
in veteran families, of transitioned veteran families. And once you're in that world, because I'm kind of a curiosity-led person and a thinker and a writer, it just leads me down an enormous number of wormholes of trying to solve a really complex problem. And a lot of my drive is about looking at the problem from lots of different angles and
Mm.
trying to help drive change to make it better, to
Yeah.
sort of notice. And so from that, I've just created a peer-led program that has been from my experience I have complex PTSD from my childhood. And I keep reading reports where they say, oh, there's no research on children of veterans and there's no parenting support for veteran and first responder
Mm.
families. So I'm like, so did someone want to get making a program on that? And so
Mm.
I just it's the same as with writing Enemy. I'm like, I read a quote once that said, if there's a book that you want to read and it hasn't been written yet, then you should write it.
Yes.
And it's the same thing. I'm going, all right, well, this might not be perfect, but
Mm.
can we get something happening? Because I know as a PTSD impacted parent myself, even though I came in going, how could anyone possibly think of their children that way? I was shocked by how much rage I felt toward my own son. He went through a stage of hitting me. It's one of the reasons that I ended up getting to the end of writing my
Mm.
first book is I couldn't believe how much of the cortisol, adrenaline charged stuff that happens
Mm.
inside your body when you're getting actively triggered. Your thinking brain is offline. And so
Yeah.
that's led me down a lot of wormholes on how the nervous system works, because I've done
Mm.
a science degree, so I'm interested in how the brain works, and then practical techniques that I wish I'd had at the
Mm.
beginning that anyone can learn. I'm interested in
Mm.
making it all accessible, that not everyone's going to access therapy and you don't have to open up all your trauma, but you need to calm the hell down and walk the hell away. You do
Mm.
need to do those two things.
Mm.
So that's sort of a roundabout way of my journey into where I am now.
Yes. Yeah. And I think what I understand from of your background, the life that you've had, um, you are also in a group of people that I have turned my mind to quite regularly. You know, my background being 30 plus years working in child protection, working in and interfacing with child protection, out of home care, and related endeavours in the community. Um, and we spend a lot of time, those of us who work in this space, thinking about, writing about, treating, assessing, doing all of our work with children and young people who are removed from home and placed in out of home care. And I've always worked with disadvantaged communities, and I've always been aware of, and I'm not just poverty is quite closely linked to um, difficulties of childhood or challenges of childhood, adversity in childhood. But so I've always kind of had in the back of my mind, there is a population of children and young people here who have had experienced quite a lot of adversity in growing up, including relational adversity, as well as the poverty and other adversity factors, who aren't talked about very much and aren't, as you described, struggle to whether they struggle to break in or whether they're not we've forgotten to ask them. It's the children who stayed at home, but their experience was not dissimilar. In fact, if it may even been remarkably the same as the children who were removed and entered out of home care. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that. I mean, it seems like your own lived experience of this is that there is that population of children and young people who weren't removed by child protection authorities who are going through very similar experiences. Um, how does what's your experience of um, how the childhood trauma community and society, perhaps more generally, have responded to you?
What I think is interesting on what you're saying is that so much of the way that all of the systems are set up requires there to be a functional adult, whether that is, a parent. Parent is often an assumption that they would be reporting that child protection, or that they're actively outreaching, or that there's a system response, school, a teacher who's really highly attuned, finding something, asking, raising questions. There's an extended family, oh, I've noticed this, I'm observing my sister or my brother. Or my experience was my dad, Vietnam veteran, came back traumatized in the dead of night, told not to talk about anything, move on with your life. That was the end of the support he received.
Mm.
My mother, when dad was home, she was just frozen. She was in a total freeze state for most of her life. And I don't know how much of that came with her prior to my dad or how much was in response to him. Most of dad's violence was directed towards us children. It didn't fit the pattern. And so every time I see the pattern, it's like, oh, the man hits the woman. Wasn't my experience.
Mm-hmm.
My experience was my siblings and I were extremely violently punished for every tiny thing we did, and it was out of nowhere for no reason. Mum never intervened. When my dad left, I remember, and this is all stuff I sort of describe in Enemy, but when my dad left, I remember having this moment where I, in my head, was looking around. You're looking around. What are we meant to do? You're watching your dad leave. You're not quite sure.
Mm.
And then in my head, a song started, ding dong, the witch is dead. Witch, oh witch, the wicked witch. That was what I was just going, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. Because the tension will be out of the house. Anytime dad had gone away for fishing trips, it felt like, oh my, we're living in a different house. And I thought, chill, it's all going to be good now. And pretty much a week after he left, I came home and I heard this really weird sound in the house, and sort of, because obviously very hypervigilant by this stage, I'd learnt, any tiny noise. I was very, very tuned into anything danger, danger. Found my mum on a couch sobbing, really drunk, and I was like, oh, okay. I'd never seen mum drunk like that. And that just began an entirely new journey of mum was drunk or unconscious all of the time.
Mm.
My dad came back one night, tried to kill mum. I'd had to go and call the police. We got taken to a women's shelter. Like, a lot of stuff was happening in our house that the police didn't ask us what had happened, didn't check in, didn't provide services. At school, I told a teacher that we'd stayed at a women's, I'd eaten a box of chocolates that was meant to be charity chocolates while I was at the women's shelter, and I kind of told a lie. But I also did that thing that kids often do, which is, Miss, sorry, my dad tried to kill my mum on the weekend and we stayed at a women's shelter, and while we were there, someone stole a box of chocolates I was meant to sell. Do I have to give you any money for them? And that feels like it's all wrapped up in this. And I was definitely trying to get out of paying money for the chocolates. But part of me was just going, what will the response be? And the response was absolutely nothing. She didn't ask me if I was okay. She just froze and went, and I said, so do I have to give you any money for the chocolates? And she went, no. And that was the extent of that. So there is a notion, and I grew up in Rockhampton High, I think ranked lowest in the state it was not a great school. So you've got rural, we were on the sole parents pension. Like we ticked every box, like all of the adverse childhood experiences. That's, apart from a person going to prison, that was the only thing that didn't happen to me as a child. And there is an assumption, and I find people doing do it to me all of the time in response to my story. Oh, but there must have been a this, but there must have been literally no, there wasn't. And we'd moved away from Brisbane where the grandparents were. But also, in our family, we would come back down to Brisbane, and they all knew Dad had changed, but they knew his story, right? That's their son. They
Mm-hmm.
knew that he came back changed from the Vietnam War. And even they did see moments where Dad had lost his nana at us and
Mm.
had hit us in a really violent, unnecessary way in front of them that makes it extremely more humiliating. And the fact that
Mm.
nobody comes and comforts you. You're
Mm.
used to not being comforted by your mum, but then the fact that nobody in your extended family contextualizes or comforts, you're left completely alone to make up and it feels like endorsement.
Mm.
And so you just feel so alone, like
Mm.
nobody actually cares about you at all. And the idea that I know that there are other people who have been through similar things to me.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, that there's an expectation of outreach as opposed to a system where it's obvious for children how to advocate. Like people actively asking. I had to do a
Mm.
talk at the Royal Children's Hospital for Domestic Violence Week, and I was talking to the domestic violence team, and one of the things they said was they wanted, because a lot of the people who see and are exposed to children, especially in a system like that, where it's a health concern, right? A child per fortnight in Australia is killed by a
Mm.
parent. People who are in domestic violence relationships, even though we don't discuss the physical violence that a lot of children receive, and we
Mm.
call it, oh, they're witnesses, and we have all of this
Mm.
stuff. There's a lot of evidence that shows actually they're usually often also victims, and they're
Mm.
far more likely to get a brain injury because of the vulnerability of their brains. What they were talking about was in that system, the doctors and the frontline people or the nurses, they think it's the social worker job
Mm.
only to be asking the questions.
Yeah.
And what they were trying to encourage me to do was to get everyone to kind of know it's actually everyone's job to
Mm.
kind of ask the questions. Because for me, if no adult is describing the elephant in the room or asking direct questions of children because they're scared, they're sort of like, well, that's not my job. Or
Mm.
I'm used to feeling expert at something and I'm uncertain, which is a really big part of it. We're humans.
Yeah.
We don't want to make it worse. We don't want to get it wrong. But if no adult is doing that because of their own discomfort, then you're putting it all on the child to be,
Mm.
oh, excuse me, can I just describe the situation that is a complete secret that I never let anybody know about? And I'm going to activate. It's way too much pressure to put on kids that they're
Mm.
going to be doing it. So that for me is part of the way that it happens is I think we discount, and I know this as an adult now where you're in a situation where you want to call, I have called people out because I have like, if something's happening to children, it's really hard for me to not sort of go, hey, I'm just not sure,
Mm.
because I want to know that I have tried.
Yeah.
But man, people don't like those conversations. It blows up it blows
Mm.
up relationships. And if you've got a really highly traumatized family in lots of different ways, everyone is creeping around each other, trying not to make it worse. There's a lot of creeping around trying not to make it worse.
Yeah. Which means there's a lot of creeping around, not doing anything to make it better.
Yeah. And specifically in my family with, I think I've done a lot of research, I guess, in a veteran and first responder space, more veteran led, but the idea of reaching out for help, admitting vulnerability
Mm.
goes against a lot of military training and your identity. And so it's a really,
Yeah.
it's an additional barrier, I guess, like especially it's usually a male in a violence context reaching out for help. So I think that's just adds another layer to, but somebody like my mum, so I now sit on a few lived experience committees and looking at how we provide social support avenues, how you reach people who are like my family.
Mm.
How do you reach someone who is unconscious in a house a lot of the time, drunk, hiding themselves away, full of shame, not reaching out to community? It's it's a really complicated thing to do.
Mm. Mm. There's a lot in there, Ruth, in what you're talking about. And there's been a number of questions that have come through my mind, and because of my age, they've gone out of my mind again. But they may well come back. Hopefully they do. In listening to you talk about your experience, I guess one of the things that I think is quite noteworthy is that you refer to yourself as having lived experience of growing up with family and relational trauma and physical trauma and emotional trauma. Um, I wonder what has been your experience when you speak to people about trauma in I guess a field that's very much, particularly when you're talking about childhood trauma, is saturated with saturated is probably not the kindest word, but is very much oriented to the children who were removed.
Yeah, it's I have to say it is one of the things that continues to drive me to speak out is that
Mm,
I feel completely overlooked.
yeah.
And I know that, yes, that's my personal experience, but I know there are other people like
Mm,
me, and it is really hard to talk about this stuff. And
mm,
I am one of the few people who actually talk about it. And I think that is because I've had more therapy than you can poke a stick at.
mm,
And so I have processed it and looked at it. And I've also, I guess, I've always been kind of, I'm the one in my family. I'm a middle child, but I'm certainly I'm the one who goes and calls the police. I'm the one who stands up to my dad. I'm the one who calls things out.
mm,
And for a long time, I judged myself for being too like my father because I was in a fawn response for a
mm,
very long time, just trying to people please. Stepping into going, it's okay for me to challenge. It's okay for me to say things that make people uncomfortable. When you've spent your entire life vigilantly trying to not upset
mm,
people
mm,
because it's dangerous, the leap between coming from there to coming from there, it's a very large one.
mm,
And, but I feel so many times that nobody is interested in this story. Nobody wants to hear it. People would prefer that you just go away a lot of the times because
mm,
it makes them uncomfortable or it points out something they don't want to see. And I just don't really feel like there's even a place for me in the system. And even now as an adult where I'm like, I have things that insights that I might be able to share with you. I don't I still feel, even though there has been progress in the way that we value lived experience, and I do sit in a
mm,
couple of roles based on that, I still very much feel like the system is like, great, tell us your story. Oh, but we're the experts. We'll take it from here.
mm.
And I'm like, well, you're a type of expert.
It's interesting because when listen to you talk about that, I feel a little bit outraged because it sounds to me like your lived experience is very much pigeonholed into this is the lived experience of a child who grew up in a home where there was domestic violence. Yeah. And as opposed to this is a child who experienced developmental trauma. They weren't safe in the home that they were in, and they were placed into a system. Um, I wonder what role. There's a number of things that I wonder about, but you've done a lot of research. What are the similarities and differences from your perspective between those young people who go into out-of-home care versus those who don't, those who stay at home as you did?
The most striking thing I notice is that the people who haven't been part of the system literally do not exist in the literature. So me actually trying to research others like me, it is an impossible task because
Mm,
I do not encounter in the literature people like me,
mm,
because we have been invisible from the start
yes,
and we remain invisible.
yes.
And there is a very strange concept I find in the research world, which in research informs a lot of the programs and blah blah
Mm,
blah, and education and the way people are taught about things, the things that are developed, is that when you're studying children, they must be under 18 years of age.
mm,
Whereas when we know adverse childhood experiences have lifelong impacts, why are we not more interested
mm,
in adults who grew up in that situation?
mm,
Because I can tell you those experiences are fresh.
mm,
I've done a lot of work, but that child is still inside of me.
mm,
And the
mm,
idea that I don't have insights to offer now and I'm not worthy of research now, you
mm,
try and find any research on people like me, it doesn't exist.
mm.
Or if you do, please tell me where it is.
Yeah, I guess so. There's a couple of things. One is, yes, as a young person who experienced the adversity that you did, that was hidden. That was almost, I guess, systematically hidden. Maybe not be the right way, but it was hidden. Whereas the children who come into care, it's the system takes over responsibility for them. It's much less hidden. But and you've kind of remained hidden right through into adulthood, and so your experience is not acknowledged. But I guess the reason why I'm harping on this point a little bit, and big part of the reason why I wanted you to come on to this podcast is because developmental trauma in childhood is a bigger problem than the children who come into care, into out-of-home care. Yeah, we know, for example, that they're kind of like two populations of kinship carer. There's it changes the title from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there's statutory or formal kinship carers who are the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the kin who take on the care of a child who has had the local child protection authorities, has come to the notice of the local child protection authorities. And then we have this other group, which is actually a larger group, I think, of informal kinship carers, and they're the ones who it hasn't necessarily been the case that child protection authorities have gotten involved and have organised the placement. That they have taken on the care of a child who couldn't safely be cared for at home with mum and or dad. So I think my point is, having myself been very interested in kinship carers, is that um, the problem is larger than we think it is in terms of developmental trauma, and perhaps we don't cater. Certainly, informal kinship carers will say the support for them is nothing compared to those where there's been statutory involvement. Um, we need to be turning, I think, our minds to this broader group of young people who are hidden. And the hidden is such a powerful word, I think, in the
Mm,
context of what you describe, which is one of not mattering,
yeah.
being hit in front of, being hit, being dressed down, whatever, in a over the top manner, in front of other adults who you would reasonably, society would reasonably expect would step in, and um, but that didn't happen. And your own experience of that was one of, I think, um, of not mattering in those moments. And so I think there's a bigger problem that we need to turn our mind to. We need to be more inclusive of the children who stayed at home. Um, I also think that there's really stark similarities in the developmental psychological impacts and outcomes for those who stayed at home as well as those who experienced statutory intervention.
The, so for me, yeah, I think I 100% agree. I had a couple of thoughts related to what you said, and again, they might leave, so I'm going to start try and stay on the topic. For me, my yes, my dad, the direct violence was one thread, but never having a mother who
Mm,
even softened quietly afterwards, spoke to me, none of those kind of things that might have allowed me to I was left, my first memory at 3 years old was of literally being chased and hit over and over again. So it's like I never had a chance for my brain to develop 1 second without that being, part of how my neurology formed. And so I was left from a very young age to make up my own conclusions about what was happening. And it was always that there was something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. I
yeah.
need to be better. I need to be better, which drove me to become, quite a big perfectionist, which created a
Mm,
shield, which meant that everybody doesn't see me because I'm like a high performing student and I look well presented and because I'm just like, you've got to be perfect. You can never make mistakes. It's always, that's the
mm,
way that I tried to stay ahead of the situation. And so for me, one of the, and I know not everybody is, I loved school. And so even though I didn't have a teacher or a mentor at the school who was offering me direct help,
mm,
the framing of a place where I did what I was told and tried hard and got an A on a report, and teachers celebrated me, and that I became school captain of my primary school. And it just gave me an alternative view of what was possible.
mm,
And that gave me a context of understanding of, well, these people seem to think I'm okay. Maybe I'm not the piece of rubbish. And so in my head,
mm,
my dad didn't value education and was like, I'd bring home all A's on my report, and he'd be like, okay, well, what does, mate?
mm,
That's like, so I had like so it gave me a way of holding on to some shred of self-esteem, I guess.
yeah.
But what you were saying before about the informal kinship
Mm,
carers, I think that is absolutely true. The way that they do education campaigns, the way that there should be whatever support is available to carers of any sort, you know, there should be, if you are doing this, you are also entitled to all of this support. Like that's a no-brainer, right?
mm. The children are the same, is the point I'm making.
Mm.
Yeah.
The children are exactly the same. And in terms of, I feel very lucky that, school came very naturally to me. It was just like, oh my God, this is brilliant. What, you learn stuff and it goes in, and I just loved learning. And it felt like a safe, it was like, oh, the bell goes at this time. Look at this. Oh, you have to
Mm,
behave, relatively nicely to me. So, but I know a lot of kids don't necessarily, they struggle at school in a different way to what I did. And I understand that teachers are under a lot of pressure. But for me, I think we need to throw the whole education concept out the window and look at, is learning all of this stuff in this particular way what produces the best outcomes for children generally? If not,
mm,
maybe we can do a bit of that education, and then part of the system can be devoted to social support, social learning, understanding about this, and then you're giving the skills that the kids can use for
mm,
themselves to help, or let them know about services that and allow children, because they're likely going to be the ones who are having to do the outreach for themselves. I've had to do it
mm,
all for myself.
mm,
And yes, that is bad, and obviously it would be more ideal if there were parents, but that was
mm,
empowering also in a
mm.
way. I
Yeah.
knew that I could do it for myself, and I would
Mm,
not let it screw you.
mm,
I will
mm,
do it for myself. And so, that whole concept of the recovery model where we're trying to empower people,
mm.
the way the system is like, well, if you've got to have a parent, oh, look, we don't. Can we just go from, some of us won't. What can we do? Like,
Mm,
don't leave the kids without support, because we know that the system is under so much pressure.
mm,
Find the kinship carers, out of home. We know that there's problems with the whole
mm.
system. Don't leave the kids without support. Like, just assume that some of them will be like me and not have the people. What can we do?
Yeah.
How do we change? I just think if we could prioritize more of that stuff, not just the unending respectful relationship badgering that my children have received, because that's where the funding
Mm,
is. Change the
mm,
whole. There's some schools that do it well. There's a school in Carlton that I've been to that has their approach. They have it because they have got a really big refugee population from highly traumatized things. A lot of kids with PTSD,
mm.
and so a lot of reactive behavior in classrooms. Those kids on site, it's like that is not treated like you're a naughty child behaving badly and disrupting the learning of others.
Mm,
It's like, hey, just go and take a little time out. There's a timeout place at any time they can go and just calm and
mm,
regulate, learn that it's okay for them, that there's a safe place, have that support. They also have on that in that school, they have support services for the parents who are, often speak English as a second language, and so, but they have a different model of
mm.
support, and not every child is going to need it, but some children do. And so I think just having a more generalized approach, assume that that is a place that you, at least some of the children will be helped. And
Mm.
it's not going to get everyone. We're not going to ever create a perfect society, but making it more embedded into the places where children are definitely going to be, I think does address some of that.
That is the point, isn't it? Like, if it's not going to happen at school, where is it going to be? I mean, if you strip it back, the idea that child protection services are just going to pick children up that are at risk, that are in adverse circumstances, that, as you say, relies on an adult reporting in. Yeah, because they're not going to go, they don't go around looking for children who are in adverse circumstances. Um, if it doesn't happen at school, then then where else would it be? Now, there's been um, over the course of my career, I've heard quite often about how schools are a place of learning. Yeah, the children come to school to learn. It's an educational environment. These other, it's not a place, and particularly this is because schools are under so much pressure, right? Teachers are under so much pressure. we we want to compartmentalize off certain aspects of a child's experience during the day and say, well, that's a social, that's a family, that's a mental health and well-being problem. That's not what schools exist for. But children spend so much time at school. They spend their time at home and at school primarily in ordinary circumstances. Um, so I wonder, you have your own children who've gone through schooling. You work in this space, you advocate in this space. Have you seen a change in the way, and you've mentioned the school in Carlton, but what more widely, have you seen a change in the way schools are tackling this issue?
Like I've done quite a lot of speaking at schools, so have gone into a lot of environments, but that's a way that I earn money, and so mostly the schools that pay me are private schools because they're the only ones who have money to pay a person like me. And
Mm,
really, ideally, what I would like is to be going to places like Rockhampton
yeah.
and to kids who are literally living through what I live through and feel like the world does not
Mm,
understand what the hell
mm,
they're talking about, that it
yeah.
doesn't feel like there is a place for us, that it
Mm,
doesn't feel like you, because for me, what I find interesting about the concept of trigger warnings,
hmm
this is something that a lot of times depending on who you're talking to, they're like, oh well, let's not trigger people. I'm like, right, am I managing their triggers or your cognitive dissonance and you don't want to hear the story? Is
mm,
it the people in the audience who are like me who are going to be triggered, or the people who aren't like me who don't like to hear it?
mm,
And for me, the bigger risk is for the kids to feel like they are the only ones going through it. The far bigger risk. And that is what it felt like to me, is that there is nobody here like me. This is shameful. I have to, that is what people are meant to be like. You see everything on TV, you know what families are meant to be like. It's not like your family. And so
mm.
you feel that you're in the shadow of society that no one wants to look at.
Yeah, I wonder what needs. I've got some ideas, but I wonder, I'm interested in your thoughts about what needs to change for adults, particularly adults who come into contact with children in a professional role, for them to be able to be more sensitive to and responsive to, open to the experience of the child. What do you think? What do you think needs to happen?
I want to hear what you say first. I'm interested because I think about it from a certain way, but I always like learning. So I would like to hear what you say, Colby.
I think that the issue is one of supervision and support for adults. I think that the adults, so we're talking, teachers at the moment, um, but across our systems, including in our child protection system, and I could say particularly in our child protection systems, it has been a recurrent theme of this podcast, which has been aligned with my own perception, that the adults struggle to hold on to the distress of the child.
Yeah.
The adults struggle to be open to and to hold on to the distress, the trauma of the child. One of the ways so they shut it down. One of the ways they do that
Mm,
is to just focus on the behavior as challenging behavior. We're
mm,
not going to, I can't think past why the child is behaving the way they are because that'll upset me
mm,
more so than even their challenging behavior is upsetting me or disrupting the class or whatever the case may be. So I think we can roll out as much education as we like, and we do, to these adults about how they need to look past the behaviour and ask certain questions and consider certain things. But until they feel able to hold on to the pain of the child, then we've got a problem with them having the capacity. to do that.
And I think we have to remember that a lot of people are also adult versions of those children.
Yeah.
And they have not processed their own stuff
Yeah.
from their pasts.
Mm.
And so a lot of time, yes, you go, well, how be that for this child? They've never been it for themselves.
Mm.
So how can they possibly do that for another person? You literally cannot. If your entire approach is don't talk about it, this is uncomfortable, the emotion has got to a point where it is, I spend my entire life suppressing my own feelings and responses. And so if you push me outside of that comfort zone, then I need to, and so it doesn't sort of, the power differential makes it a larger issue with an adult child relationship, because you can be more unhinged with children because they're not going to, you're not held to the same account in that relationship. Often the child will not sort of a child will not dob on adults. They will put up with, because they're not, they know that person has authority over them. And so they're not going to necessarily go, that person was inappropriate in the way that they spoke to me. And they don't have that context. And depending on the age, especially, they don't have the concept of mind. They don't, all of the stuff. So I think that the human side of it needs to be acknowledged, that most people haven't done the kind of work they need to hold that. And so for me, going back to what you said previously about school's a place for education, and so say for instance we're talking about a teacher and they're like, I'm here to teach them maths, bro. I am not here to hold the blah 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 blah. And that is why I think a more integrated care model, because they might not have that, but you can't go, well, every teacher then needs to go and also get therapy on their own childhood wounds so that they're more able to. Oh my God, wouldn't we love if just everyone mandated went out and got some therapy and dealt with all their crap? A lot less stuff would happen in the world if that happened. But given what we've got, just having a model where, okay, this child is being disruptive, and for it to be a non-shaming, it's not like off you go to the psycho ward, that person, you're the weirdo. That person, it just becomes like a much more, we need to, for me, the nervous system regulation model, do you know much about that? Have any of your guests sort of spoken about that? So do you know the hand-brain model of and you flipping your lid vibes?
I do, and
You do?
It's a Dan Siegel,
Dan Siegel, yes.
model, but no one has spoken about it yet. So I'm happy for you to speak to it.
Okay, so this is a foundational part of all of the work I do, because it has totally flipped my entire understanding of what is happening for me and for kids, and that these are the practical things that anyone can learn, even if they haven't dealt with anything. Quick science lesson. So the hand-brain model by Dan Siegel is, this is your spinal cord. In here is your limbic brain. This is your amygdala, which is the smoke detector. This is your thinking brain. In a normal situation, your brain is like that. The role of the amygdala is to be constantly scanning your environment for danger. It's a process that is happening unconsciously. It's happening all of the time, 24 hours a day. It's why you hear a crack behind you, and before you notice anything's happened, your heart might start racing, if you're walking in a dark street. When you have had a lot of trauma, this guy has had to be working a lot.
Yeah.
As soon as it detects danger, it flips off the thinking part of your brain, so your executive function, where you're reasonable and rational, and you're operating now in a lower part of your brain, which is all instinct and emotional and run away. So it's the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. That means your entire physiology changes. You are not in your thinking brain. You have moved into a body-based response. So you are ready to run away from danger. or fight a person. We do this all the time. And a lot of our emotional reactivity comes from this space. Anyone who is in this mode, as opposed to this mode, is not making great choices.
No.
So instead of trying to apply cognitive processes of, now this has happened, now you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do, I'm sorry, but my thinking brain is not online. I cannot do, you need to do some work first. There is a step before that. And if we can all learn the step before, which is firstly, notice that it has happened. Notice that your thinking brain has gone offline. Breathe. Feel your feet in your shoes. Come back to the moment. Take some time to regulate your system. Walk away if you need to do it. Pay attention to what is in your surroundings. Just feel your, when I do my speaking, instead of doing trigger warnings, I teach people the process of, let's just feel your feet in your shoes. Come back. If you feel anything that has charged you, take a breath. Come back to your body. Have a moment of pause. If that's too hard and you're finding that you just, because what happens is then you might start thinking and you're arguing every time you do it, it flips. And so you've got to start again. There is some evidence and it's not robust, but I always track and experiment with processes and techniques. Because I did a biochemistry degree, I like the experimentation approach. I do not believe that I'm always curious. I will give anything a go. And there's some science that has come out that says actually an emotional response takes 90 seconds. And as somebody who has, lived steeped in a lot of emotions where you're going, well, I've been crying for 2 days, so it doesn't feel like 90 seconds. It feels like a lot longer than that. And the way that I understand it in context of more of a mindfulness and body-based approach is what happens is that, yes, you have the original 90 seconds, but then you think, and then you start ruminating, or you're arguing, or you tell another story, and I know that I've spoken to you briefly that you try and focus, instead of going back over old terrain again and again and again and again, you're talking more present moment and forward thinking. And for me, that is one of the things that, yes, I do think that there needs to be excavation of past, and certainly some of my most profound healing has happened in relationship with a psychotherapist. I was in intense psychotherapy for 7 years. I could have bought a house with the amount of money I've spent on that, and that process was really for me more about forming an attachment with another person who I trusted, and finding a safe person. Not everyone's going to want to do that work. I found it kind of interesting. But everybody can do, let's learn to come back to the present moment. That thought is not, that process of learning to observe your thoughts, go, oh, stop feeding it. Okay, what can I hear? What can I feel? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I touch? And if you'll find you're thinking, this is how I supercharge it, is if my thoughts are really, really loud up there, and it's really hard for me, it's like I can barely, my thoughts are so active that I can't even feel my body, then you have to amp it up. Do some exercise. Like you've got to complete the cycle of your fight, flight, freeze response has been activated. Complete the cycle. I will be punching things. I will get the energy out. And then if it's still hard, then I start to go, okay, and it's really hard to connect with your senses because it's so loud up there. I will have essential oils. I will wrap myself in. I will do stuff so that the sensor, you splash yourself with cold water, go into things so that you cannot fight. You will intensify your sensory so that then you can fight, and then you can breathe, and then you can ground, and then you can move through. That for me has been like, it's a large part of the underlying thread of what I teach, because it's, for me, it's accessible. You don't have to have any money to do it. You don't have to have, all you need to do is breathe and, whatever, come back to your body.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot in there again. You've said a couple of things that I think it'd be really that I guess speaks to something in me. And I had a guest on recently talking about attachment in supervision. And we tend to, historically, we thought about attachment as being, originally it's a process that occurred between a child and a parent, usually the mother, and then the father came in, and then we started talking about multiple attachment relationships, and it became broadened out. Now, my guest, Alex Rowell, we were talking about supervision, but when you talk about um, when you mention attachment, you mention teachers, it occurs to me that the relationship between a child and a teacher is an attachment relationship, in the sense that it is a relationship. It does, your own attachment history influences the way, for the child and for the teacher, the way you come together and interact. Alex put it like this, that any attachment relationship, or any relationship where there is vulnerability, where there is insecurity, where there is a third thing that off the top of my head I can't quite remember at the moment, but is an attachment relationship. What he was really saying is that if we take a broader perspective on attachment relationships as such, that's actually quite helpful. It's quite a helpful model to apply to other relationships. And if you were to apply it to the teacher, and I don't want to be, I'm going to come round to saying something else about teachers that reflects my views more generally. But if you apply it to the teacher, the child relationship, what you're actually, if you apply attachment theory there, you're talking about, if the teacher doesn't look beyond the behavior of the child and look at why it's really happening, and just goes, no, I'm here to teach math. This child is being disruptive. I'm just going to respond to that. If you think about that as an attachment relationship, nonetheless, then that's quite a unhelpful response to the child. Like it's a really unhelpful response to the child, and that experience will become integrated into their overall attachment style, the way in which they approach life and relationships. So I don't think I just don't think that it is even credible to suggest that the teacher-child relationship, like the supervisor-supervisee relationship, is just about knowledge sharing or knowledge developing. It's about so much more than that. So it doesn't pass muster really to suggest that schools are only a place of learning. Yeah. Now, I think schools have come a long way. It would be my observation. Well, they've come some distance towards this integrated service model that I also heard you mention in there. In that there has been an increased focus on well-being and well-being staff, and children having a place to go. My own thoughts around the triggering for teachers is that I've had a lot of experience of teachers finding what I say about the children to be really illuminating to them for themselves. That they're like, oh my God, that's what it was like for me. It's how it is still now. So it's been a validating experience for them, but that doesn't necessarily get them across the line of not responding to, not giving into those initial instinctive self-protective responses. But insight is part of the way, you know, I, yeah, like, it just doesn't, if you think about it as a child, as an attachment relationship, it just doesn't make sense to just completely deny while the child is crying and just see the behavior as disruptive behavior. Like, you wouldn't do that in a parenting role. But essentially, you are in a parenting role. You have in loco parentis role when the child is at school. I like the idea. Have you seen more developments around providing an integrated service model, more well-being activities in schools in your own work?
Not really.
Mm.
That was one of the exceptions, and I think again, private
Mm.
schools. My God, the amount of pastoral care and support and
Mm.
whatever that's offered in those environments compared to my kids went to the my daughter's just graduated, but my son's still at high school. They do not have the resources for that. That is not like I hear
Mm.
a lot of the people I know send their kids to private school, and you're like, you guys are getting a whole different experience to us.
Mm.
But I wanted to pick up on something that you said about the teacher relationship and attachment. And for me, both of my kids are neurodivergent, and that was a surprise. And that was, late life ADHD diagnosis. My
Mm.
children are both autistic. My son also has ADHD. And I had to throw out every concept I had about how to parent my child in
Mm.
a way to get the best out of them. And for me, neurodivergence is a really interest. There's so many over. I was like, how did I directly make my son so traumatized? Because his responses, that huge emotional reactivity, all of that stuff looks
Mm.
like trauma. It looks like trauma. And you're going, how did I do that? And I'm like, I understand about epigenetics, but it's not. It's a different thing, but it's same because the same kind of fear circuitry is activated. Your amygdala is more reactive. You're doing more vigilant scan. There's so many similar processes, and
Mm.
there's a lot to be learned about trauma and neurodivergence overlap. There's a lot more research that needs to be done in that. But for me, I am a big believer in the Pepsi challenge, right? Why don't we do more research on how a really positive, affirming model of teaching? You want more control in your classroom? I Pepsi challenge you
Mm.
to, instead of trying to be stricter, the one thing that was my son's, if the teacher is strict, oh no,
Mm.
that is going to be causing the trouble because it's unfair.
Mm.
He doesn't care if it's for him or if it's for somebody else, or if, unfairness is a massive trigger for neurodivergent people.
Mm.
And so it's like if that is over the top, we can see what's going on, mate. You're losing it over there, and then you're putting it on the kids like it's their fault. And what if people can see that?
Mm.
But I think go back to where in the teacher training, I understand you might not see your role. You absolutely rightly, you're not a social worker, and you might not see that role. But do you want a more in control classroom? Do you want to have children who are more able to learn? Help them
Mm.
to stay regulated. Make regulation breaks part of your process. Teach teachers, and let's do more research on like let's do the Pepsi challenge. This
Mm.
is a strict teacher doing this, blah, 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 blah. Track outcomes, track educational outcomes, tie it to whatever you want to tie it to and see what
Mm.
happens. Have people like you, others who work with children in a more sensitive and emotional and human way, have the insights from this influence that so that, and then let them try it out. It's like, I'm not telling you that it's going to produce results, but it's going to produce results.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try it for yourself.
Mm. Strictness is an interesting. While you're talking about strictness, I'm thinking about why would an adult want to be so strict? And I guess where my mind would go is why does this person fear losing control so much? What has been their experience in life that has meant that they feel like they need to be in control
Mm.
a lot of the time?
Yeah, I
I
think,
think
yeah.
Yeah, so I think we need to teach like I think teachers need to be able to regulate themselves as well as children needing to be able to do that. Because if teachers are that I worry about that teacher who is strict because of a fear of losing control, then
Mm.
they're projecting fear into the classroom. And what does fear do? When the children start to feel for the teacher, feel what the teacher is feeling. These are unconscious processes. We're getting into witchcraft a little bit here now from some people's point of view, but yet we feel for other people.
Oh,
That's
it's
an
not witchcraft.
unconscious process.
There's a lot of
No,
evidence actually about
absolutely.
neuroception and science and attunement actually producing, you can measure it. It is
Yeah.
not witchcraft.
So
Uh,
when the teacher's projecting that fear, what it,
yeah.
what is it? What's happening for the young, particularly young people who, like you, have experienced significant adversity, or like your children, who are neurodiverse and are easily heightened.
And I think, back to something you said earlier about, you know, comforting crying children. I think it is much easier when the trauma expresses itself as crying for people to access compassion. When your trauma expresses
Mm,
itself as anger, that is a lot more difficult for people to see
mm,
as anything but an attack and something that needs to be stopped and reprimanded and, like, okay, you're
mm,
going to do that to me. And I feel it as well. Like that is a big thing I have had to learn, is
mm,
because my go-to response is not to flee or to, fawning 100%. I have learned to have to overcome that. My response
mm,
is a fight response. And so you
mm,
try and back me into a corner, and at school it wasn't so much, but any situation where it has, I do feel that somebody is completely diminishing me, cutting me down to size, trying to kind of have power over me in a way that is inappropriate. I'm very, very sensitive to that. And
mm.
it will never, ever make me back away from the fight. It will
Yeah.
just make me go, oh, did you want to go now? Did you want to have a go with me? Because I'm literally happy to stand
Yeah.
here and go toe to toe. And you might be surprised at how much rage I have to access here, mate.
Mm. I refer to these as enduring sensitivities. When I'm treating children and people, the expectation is that they'll just, with the help of the therapy, they'll just get over the adversity that happened in their life. But rather, I see them as enduring sensitivities that are always
Mm,
there. They can be activated. But children, what we want is an outcome where children are less under the influence of those enduring sensitivities. Ruth, just to bring it kind of full circle in terms of some of these major things that we've talked about. I think we started off with you were talking about recognizing the problem in the first instance, recognizing the problem that there is a group of people, or there are groups of people where there are these significant challenges, where those challenges have been overlooked for too long, and that they require um, some understanding and responding to. Yeah, we talked about that. We've talked about schools, schools being a place where children spend a lot of time. A lot of the time, children are not able to speak up for themselves. They need adults who will notice, and so we need staff in our schools, and also in our health services, doctors, nurses, dentists, you know, uh, psychologists, counselors. We need them all to be very aware of and understanding of childhood adversity, developmental trauma, that it is a bigger problem than just those children who are in out of home care. Yeah. Um, we want our teachers to be sensitive, to be educated, to be sensitive and responsive. My input would be is we want our teachers to feel in the best place that they're able to do that. And I
mm,
would also acknowledge one of my previous guests, Megan Corcoran, who said um, that you don't have to be a therapist to provide a therapeutic experience for
mm,
children.
mm.
Well, yeah. Um, I think we've been heading in the way of, we've been heading in the direction of, we really need the government, we need policymakers and funders to be really investing in, what do you think they need to be investing in?
I think the compartmentalizing approach that is often taken, well, this does this and this does that, that that inherent rigidity in the system, and there is, to me, a defensiveness in that,
Mm,
a lack of curiosity. I think what we need to be investing in is get a whole lot of different people from a whole lot of different sectors coming together and being willing to actually change the way the systems work. Like
mm,
actually be going, is this model right? And
mm,
that is very challenging for people who have doubled down on, you know, I would say education. I mean, my dad was he was a fitter and turner by trade, but became a TAFE teacher. And the teaching model, I do experience this a bit with teachers, is that teachers know best.
mm.
Like there is the I'm the teacher and you're the student, and that can translate in other circumstances. And I would say rather than just it being funded, people have to be open to change.
Yeah. There needs to be an open inquiry, open inquiry into, it's not quite the words I was looking for. I had some really good words in my head a moment ago. Again, age, they
I
come
know.
and
They
they
go out,
go.
don't they?
But yeah, an openness to ask questions, I
That's right.
guess.
And to people, I understand that there is a warranted caution in responsiveness, and things move very slowly. And so for me, that model of being more open to experimentation, even if you can't fund the whole thing, you cannot change a system that is broken or where gaps exist based on everyone wants the model and the evidence. Well,
Mm,
I'm sorry, if you're addressing a gap that hasn't been addressed before, there is no model because it's a gap.
mm,
And so to take an approach where we go, what is the risk? The risk for me is that it remains the same.
mm,
The harm that is being caused is already being caused
mm,
when there is no interest in innovation and trying new things because it might cause harm. Well, I'm sorry, it's already what exists is already causing harm. So how much more harm can adding a few breathing frickin' exercises into the day cause? That is
mm.
the thing that I'm always going, what is the risk? What are we talking about? I
And there's an
think,
evidence base that help. It may not be in a particular group, but that sort of stuff has merit.
don't you think? And
Mm,
so for me, that approach of fund less research, fund more programs, like actually translate what is learned into practical ways of applying knowledge. Make it more of that experimental process and track what is working. You do the research, but you can't just keep researching what exists because then you're not actually developing new ways and making change happen. So for
mm.
me, the funding needs to come from doing some trial and reframing what the risk is, because the
Mm,
risk is already happening, and a new response to it might not be perfect, but
mm.
we will not learn the new lessons and make things better. There has to be
Yeah.
some
Dipping of the
change.
toe in the water. Yeah. We need,
Yeah.
and what I'm hearing you say is academic research, yes, but program-based research yeah, we need to be giving things a go
Giving
and
things a go.
yeah, yeah. And look, there's a I don't think that there is a lack of evidence around taking um, a more open, questioning, inquiring approach to the experience of others. There's not a lack of evidence in the merit on the merit of doing that. Um, but yeah, you've mentioned risk. That we could do a whole different, have a whole different podcast question, conversation around risk. Um, but yeah, I think we'll part that. We'll leave that for maybe another conversation. It is a risk averseness is a barrier that needs to be considered, I think, in any endeavor, new endeavor. Um, I guess I would like to see a lot more support for families who are doing things difficult. I'd actually like to see a lot less statutory intervention and a lot more family support before it
Oh,
gets
me
to
too.
that place. But
100%.
but interestingly, if we can't even acknowledge that there are groups out there who are slipping through the cracks, then that I think that becomes a little bit problematic when we say, well, hang on, we'll remove less children and we'll provide support to families. I mean, how are we going to find and access these families if we just don't even know, or we pretend we don't know they even exist out there. But I'd like to see a lot. I'd like to see an outcome down the track where we're removing less children, but we're increasing family support. And I do think, and I think with schools are, if the children spend so much time in school, and we talked about their children do need adults to stand up for them, an
Mm,
adult somewhere. They spend so much time at school. If it's not schools, if schools aren't part of this picture, then I don't know what is.
mm.
So I'd love to see wellbeing programs, teacher education, and particularly teacher support
Yes, that's exactly
funded
what I
more.
was thinking. It's
Mm,
like you cannot put all this on teachers to do, like the pressure is too much. We need to be
mm,
investing in that. The teachers need this ongoing support
yeah,
themselves
yeah.
because they're managing 25 kids, whatever. That's a lot of stuff
Mm,
coming at you all the time, all day. Teachers need support with that. They need admin support for all the stuff, like just we need to be providing, we need to double down on that school system as and make it so that the teachers are leaving because there's too much pressure already on them.
that's right. We talked a little bit a moment ago about projection, and in a one-on-one context, you're just dealing with what the other person is projecting. But imagine a classroom environment where 30 children are projecting all of their experience towards the teacher, and also the teacher's own reaction to that is being felt by the children. It is an incredibly complex dynamic, and um, maybe I think there are a lot of roles in when you're working with children, when you're working with anyone. I think there are challenges associated with that, and a lot of those challenges have to do with that dynamic between you, where they're feeling and experiencing this, and you're feeling and experiencing this, and there's that interplay between. And I think, yeah, everyone, teachers, uh, even parents, grandparents, kinship carers, social workers, social care workers. We all hold a lot for others,
Mm.
and we would benefit from being able to be access support and understanding around that.
Support those who support others, and the whole thing will benefit.
Yeah, well, there's some people on my podcast have pretty much said it starts there, but it can, that would just make such a big change. Support those who support others. That's a really nice place to finish,
It
I
is.
think, Ruth. So thank you very much for coming on, and yeah, I wish you well in your own endeavors. What's next for you?
Well, I'm in the process of trying to get parenting after trauma program that I have innovatively developed in a proper trial with clinical oversight and try and get some testing on that. So people always take so long to respond. I'm like, let's get done, go tomorrow, do it. So that's not how life works. Slowly. That's right. So that's a big part of what I'm doing, is trying to get some people into that and let's start experimenting, start getting some feedback on what works, what doesn't, how we could, because for me, exactly what you said about that, rather than have people go into out-of-home care, how can we support parents help to regulate themselves while having to do stuff? How can we teach them some processes, and hopefully it will help take the charge down, and that will stop some of the issues that the children are facing. And I think we need to be supporting parents.
Well, I'd love for the interest to be piqued here in Australia in the parenting after trauma. I suspect one of your biggest markets potentially is the US.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll hopefully it piques the interest of some people in the US as well, because there's a lot of seems to be a lot of resources that are put into looking at veterans and veterans' mental health and well-being. And then it's only natural that it should be looking at veterans and their families when they return.
Yeah.
So, thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Colby.